Hello mate, welcome back to our Delve 2.0 reimagining for Path of Exile 2. We are on the final part of the series, part 4, and that is all about crafting fossils, resonators and items. In part 1 we looked at how we could change the gameplay loop, and that's from maps into Delve and how we experienced the Delve UI and exploring the Delve map, all the way to endgame and some possible new gameplay opportunities that we could have with Delve there. In part 2 we took a look at the mine encampment, where we had an entirely new UI and system where we could, buy our dynamite and buy our flares, but also invest in sulfite generators and a whole new system to upgrade our car, add modifications to it, and choose which different modifications we wanted to add on a player per player basis, which was fun. In the last part 3, we looked at bosses and loads of different boss encounters that we came up with for different biomes, but also a whole endgame arc all the way to Pinnacle Uber All. But for many of you, the most important part will be this part, all about crafting. So, let's get into it. Alright, so it's very important for me to start this off with my thinking here, okay? So, fossils and essences, to me, served not the same, they're very different systems, but if we were going to combine essences and Delve in the way that we have here, I think this was one of the core things that motivated that, which is that I felt they offered kind of parallel systems and they could potentially be, merged together, and so that's what we've tried to do here. The objective with this is, of course, to simplify this method of crafting, try and take the best bits of both of these, and then make room for other crafting options that we're going to have available to us. We know that the devs have said, Jonathan and Harishi talked about this in their interview, that they might have specific crafting options for specific item types, and we'll cover some of that as well here. But we've got two options, two ways that we could approach this, and I wanted to lay them out both for you and see what you think would be best. I know what I think would be best, and I'll tell you that in a minute. Right, so the first one we're going to take a look at is the essence style option. So fossils add a specific mod to an item and randomize another one that exists on the item. And this is very similar to how they've reworked the chaos orb. So it gives a mod with one hand and takes away a mod with the other. So using another fossil always replaces this fossilized mod that was added. And just like essences, we get an essence mod. You can't have more than one, and it will be replaced if you use another essence. Fossils guarantee a minimum tier of a specific mod to be added to an item. The tier of the fossil defines the tier of the minimum mod, very similar to essences. So the higher the quality of the essence, the higher the tier of the mod that you're going to be getting. The maximum mod tier is defined by the item's eye level, and fossils can be combined and upgrade of 3:1 ratio. We've seen on the bottom left here, this design tooltip was inspired by Fire Penguin Master. I did a talk on Mako and Mokka's channel. I'm sure you guys have probably seen it by now, but Fire Penguin Master was the guy on Reddit. We did a podcast with him, and he showed us his whole thinking about left-aligned item tooltips, and this was kind of inspired by that. So yeah, as you can see here, pristine jagged fossil. So the tier or the quality is pristine and the type is the jagged fossil. It adds one guaranteed affix of at least tier 3, so this is what depends on the quality, to a rare item and re-rolls one other random affix. Replaces any fossilized mods already on the item. And then you can see here that you've got options of what it can do to the item. So this works on any armor or jewelry item but cannot be used on weapons. And that is because we've got an entirely different system, which I'll be doing another series, presenting a whole new form of content. It's actually not a bring back from an old league, it's an entirely new thing, which I think would be really cool in PoE 2, and we have a whole weapon crafting system in there, which is separate. So look forward to that, that's going to be coming. I've already designed it all as well, I just need to record it. So we wanted to do this one first. So as I see it, we've got pros and cons to this system. The pros are it keeps the spirit of essences, focusing on specific mods that you can guarantee. So you feel like very safe in the knowledge that if I use this quality fossil, of this type, I'm going to get this mod on this specific slot. And it's very simple and clear of how to use it. And I think that's the thing that I really like about the essence system, and what I think it has over fossils is that it is very, very simple to understand from a crafting perspective. Cons of this is it limits the mod options. So because fossils would offer many different mods available, you've got more options there. So that's one of the trade-offs. And you lose some of the niche kind of like interesting fossil use cases where you had tons and tons and tons of different fossils that had very unique qualities to them. We're going to take a look at all of the different types of fossils in a second, but first I want to present the other crafting option, and that is a mod removal sort of option. So this version of the fossil system, you can see on the bottom here, it re-rolls one mod from a very specific pool of mods based on the fossil type. This is a way of targeting the removal of certain mods, providing a series of potentially good mods for each build in replacement. This will, however, also still re-roll another random mod unpredictably. So each time you use the fossil, you're still going to be re-rolling another affix on the item that you can't control. So this isn't super deterministic. Both the mod tier and the mod itself have an aspect of randomness here. So this is a much more chaotic and harder to control form of crafting, but it has a bit more depth for that. If you hold Alt on the item, you can see what the mod pool will be. So this is how I've done this tooltip. Very similar, but in this bottom section, you've got the different item types that you can use it on, and then essentially the available mods from using that fossil. So I hope you're following along with me. The idea here is that, say I had some gloves and I used a pristine jagged fossil, it would target a physical modifier on the item, and it would replace it with one of these physical mods. So added fizz, increased melee, or projectile damage. The thing with this is it would also get rid of another mod. So it's a bit more targeted, but it's still quite chaotic. So what are the pros of this? Well, it keeps that kind of spirit of fossils alive, where you're targeting certain mod pools. And it also adds an interesting thing where you're specifically removing a type of mod. So it is a bit more deterministic. It's just the downside, obviously, of, potentially creating issues with another mod that you wanted on the item. I think that strength, though, is also the biggest downside of this type of system. And I think it's also the biggest downside of what fossils were in Path of Exile 1, where if you really knew how to use the system, you could, not deterministically, but much more deterministically, craft very powerful items, and it became like a very, very niche thing to understand the exact fossils that you needed to use on what item and when you needed to use them. But if you did, they were so powerful that you kind of felt like you had to use that system, and then it became like mandatory. It felt quite mandatory, when essences never struggle from that, I don't think. Essences were so simple and kind of elegant that you didn't need to stress about all this complexity in the crafting system. And I think that complexity can be added in other places in the game with other layers of crafting, instead of having this one very powerful means of crafting things. And obviously, the con is that it is much more complex to understand. So you can decide what you think. I personally think that the more essence-leaning, crafting option 1 is the way to go with this, and that is how I'm going to be approaching the rest of this kind of redesign into this screen here. Alright, so now I've done this kind of list conversion cheat sheet that is going to explain the tiers and the types of fossils that are available to us. So on the left here, I've got a full list of all the fossils that you can get. I've added in some fun ones. We've got strength, intelligence, dexterity. We also have the golden fossil that we mentioned before that you can get from the golden biome. So I've tried to cover as many archetypes as possible without getting the system too bloated and out of control. Hopefully at least as many as essences. And then we've got the tiers, okay? So just like we had screaming, shrieking in PoE 1, you've got crude fossils, dull fossils, jaded fossils, and this shows the minimum tier of mod that they can pull. So the interesting thing here is that these aren't fixed like essences were. So an essence would give you an exact value for that craft. What fossils do in this system is they give you a minimum tier. So if I craft, using crude fossils and the item level allows it, I could get up to a tier 1 mod. It just means it's way less likely, and we have all of the weighting. So this is kind of similar to what they did in Necropolis, where they added like an ability to remove the bottom level of crafts. So you've got a little bit of determinism, a little bit of power at your hands, and you then get to decide based on market value what you think, the risk you want to take with your currency. So you could just buy, a perfect fossil and guarantee a tier 1 roll of that type. So say, a perfect prismatic fossil would guarantee a T1 elemental metal roll on your boots or, you know, whatever it was. So that's the system in a nutshell. There's a bit more depth to it with the tiering thing here, but it's similar to fossils in that way. And then we come on to resonators and how these interact with fossils, okay? So resonators here are completely different. You don't have to have a resonator in order to use a fossil. You can apply a fossil straight onto an item. What resonators allow you to do is one of two things. So let's start off with chaotic resonators. These function just like chaotic remnants in PoE 1 with the essence system, where you can apply these to your encased fossilized monsters in maps, and then you've got a chance to upgrade the fossil quality inside them, making them more challenging. It could do nothing, but then also I thought one fun thing could be it perhaps every now and then when you use one of these on a fossilized monster, there's a chance for them to turn into a mini boss, so they completely change, you know, like what monster they are, and then all of a sudden they become a mini boss encounter, which I thought could be fun. So that's our first type, and then we've got our crafting resonators, and these are where you can combine two fossils together in order to get some unique effects. So first off, we've got a prime resonator, and these drop much later in Delve. These are like quite hard to get and quite rare crafting opportunities. So a prime resonator, by placing two of the same fossil in a prime resonator, means that the fossil will not re-roll another mod on the item. So this obviously requires that you have an open affix slot or an already fossilized affix on the item. So essentially I could put two lucent perfect fossils in, and I could guarantee that I'm going to get a tier 1 mana roll and not have to re-roll any other stat on the item. So it removes the downside of this crafting method. Then you've got a pristine resonator. These allow two fossils to be used on one body armor at the same time. So specifically, this only works on body armors, and the idea is that, you know, it's a big enough equipment type that it can handle this form of crafting, let's say. But it's the only way to be able to get two fossilized mods onto a single armor type. And so because we're focusing on armor with this, I thought, why not give the opportunity to get two of these using this very rare crafting method. And then finally, potentially the most interesting one is primordial resonators. So primordial resonators allow the combination of two perfect fossils to create entirely new exclusive affixes and even unique items. The combinations of which fossils and bases create what will be for the community to discover. So this was kind of like a little nod to rune words in D2, but you've got 17 different fossil types. You can take any two of these and then try and combine them together and figure out what they're going to create. So it wouldn't take super long for the community to figure this out. You could actually make this like a 3-slot resonator, and then that would create a huge number of variations, and then you could actually have like a really deep rune word system potentially from that. But then you'd have to create so many different things, or, you know, like have so many like dead results that didn't mean anything. So yeah, if you wanted to push this, you could. But beyond the rune system, which is, you know, a fun idea, but I didn't necessarily think it was super practical, this is a way to open up entirely new affixes later on in the game. So when you're able to get hold of those perfect fossils from buying them or delving for them, then you're going to be able to get, you know, these really powerful affixes that you can put onto your armor and jewelry pieces that are quite unique and bring back a whole other layer of complexity and depth, but just at a later stage in the system. So it's quite simple to understand earlier, but then using primordial resonators later, you can get those much more niche fossilized mods. All right, now let's talk about abyss items. So abyss items are a new item base type of jewelry. So you can get abyssal amulets or abyssal rings, and their implicit is that they have an abyssal socket waiting for an abyssal jewel or an abyssal gem. So we'll go into what those are specifically soon. They always have a fractured light radius mod as a prefix or suffix, as we can see on this unique ring here. And the idea here is that by removing an affix, we can actually increase the power of abyssal jewels and gems that can go into these, because we can take the power from somewhere else and move it onto this. So abyssal jewels work basically the same as they did in PoE 1. However, because we're losing an implicit as well as one of the affixes, you can make these much more powerful. And so here is an example, you know, Dread Shell, Searching Eye Jewel, you get 15% increased proj damage, chance to suppress. I know suppress might not be in the game anymore, but this is just an example of the power level. Chance to gain onslaught on kill, chance to gain onslaught on unique hit, and some res. So you can make the mods on these really interesting and really impactful, because they're taking, you know, essentially two affixes off of the jewelry items that you would be competing with. Here's an example of a unique abyssal ring called the Eye of the Deep. It has an abyssal socket, as we talked about, so you would put your jewel in there. And then we have that fractured mod at the bottom here. This unique item is kind of fun. We had this idea that your first 1 to 4 skill sockets convert 50% of their damage to cold and 50% to chaos. Chaos and cold damage increases affect each other. You can't be blinded. You have chill and freeze avoidance, and you have some cold and chaos res. This is a fun little idea. The flavor text is: look into the abyss and see nothing until it is familiar. Look into nothing and find yourself. Looking back in waiting. That is an example of an abyssal ring base that you could put one of your abyssal jewels into. Then we have abyssal skill gems, and these are an entirely new thing. And the idea here is that instead of putting an abyssal jewel in, because we've made that socket more powerful, we can now put skill gems in and gain a skill gem. So you'll find these inside Delve by defeating, you know, maybe the liches, maybe some of the different bosses, or just fighting through the Delve content. And you gain certain unique skills that are kind of abyss related. So we've got beguiling form here, and this periodically fears nearby enemies for a short time based on their power. The lower the enemy's power, the longer they will be feared. And fear is this mechanic we've been playing around in our Ascendancy series with, where basically a monster has to run away from you, but they run at 25% of their speed. So it's not annoying, you know, action RPG game. We don't want to be chasing enemies down. But yeah, this is just a unique skill that maybe wouldn't make it as a skill gem, you know, in of itself in the rest of the game. But it has this very unique kind of dark abyssal theme to it. And you can get that from this gem. On top of that, you can see this implicit here. It has 2 to 5 support sockets, so you can get different versions of these unique abyssal skill gems that, you know, are obviously much rarer and more powerful than others. Getting a 5-socketed version of this beguiling form might be an incredibly expensive drop, you know, great drop to have. So that is abyssal items that come in the form of abyssal amulet and ring bases, and then some abyssal jewels that you can socket into them. Now let's look at fractured items, and I think fractured items are, you know, something that I think is beloved in PoE 1. I don't see why they wouldn't bring it back, and I think Delve is the perfect place to do it. It just feels like, I don't know, something about cracking the earth and going deep underground. It feels like fractured items are a good place to double down. We talked about in the Uber All fight that you could get double fractured mods, so this is just exploring that. So importantly here, fractured mods aren't only available in Delve, they just drop at a higher rate than in other areas of the game. Here you can see a Dreadblade Corsair sword, and we've got a double fracture on it. So this will have dropped from Uber All, from that pinnacle Delve fight we discussed in the part 3 of this series. And you can see here, you know, it's a pretty good fracture. We've got like a T1 or T2 increased fizz roll, and then we've got some cold resistance. So, you know, maybe that's good, maybe that's not great. But I just wanted to show this off in a tooltip that, you know, we've got this slightly pinkish quality to the fractured mod there, and you can see an example of what I was thinking of. Then we've got fracturing orbs, and you guys are familiar with fracturing orbs. We generated and painted together this fracturing orb icon to try and keep in with the new and updated orb artwork. So what does a fracturing orb do? It fractures one of the existing affixes on an item, and it cannot be used on an item that already has a fractured mod on it, of course. So the idea is that these drop from, you know, Delve bosses at a higher rate, and Uber All potentially at an even higher rate than that. And also, keeping in with the theme that we have for Delve crafting, you can only use these on armor pieces. And that is because we have an entirely new system for weapon crafting that we've created for our other series that we'll be putting out after early access has come about. There will be another 3 or 4 part series similar to this one called COLOSSEUM. And that is a mechanic around a arena, a Colosseum, as you can imagine. There's lots of intricacies to it, and I look forward to presenting that to you guys then. However, that's going to do it for the 4-part Delve reimagining that we've done here. Please let me know what you think. If you've, you know, watched through every one of the parts of this, I massively appreciate you. I hope you've enjoyed it. I mean, I assume if you're here, then you have. And I hope it's kind of just inspired maybe some ideas for you. I'm really curious to hear what you think, you know, you would do or you would like to see with Delve 2.0. I hope that the way of doing this in parts has been a bit more consumable and a bit more digestible for you. I know the incursion video that we did before, you know, it had all this depth to it. If anything, it had potentially a little bit more depth to it, but it was, you know, it was like an hour long nearly. So I appreciate that not everyone wants to sit down and watch an hour long video. But, you know, if you liked this kind of thing, then that's definitely an option. Just, you know, watch it in parts yourself, break it up. But if you want to see more of this kind of content, then do subscribe, hit the like on this, and go and watch the rest of the stuff that we got on the channel. We've got loads more of this coming up. We're only just getting started. This is like a whole new era of Path of Exile. It feels like the dawning of, you know, like when D2 came about or something like that. I'm fully appreciate that I'm hoped up and coped up on this, but yeah, very excited, and we're going to be putting out more and more design content like this on the channel. So friends, exiles, thank you very much for watching. I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Ta-da.